Hi, my name is Anna, and I'm going to be talking to you about using storytelling to craft higher converting multi-device experiences. A few things before we begin today. I'm going to take questions through the chat function that you'll find in the UI of Zoom, so not the Q&A function, but use the chat function instead. I'm going to be using taking most of the questions towards the end of this webinar. If there's some questions I can answer quite quickly, I might take them during the webinar as well. But make sure when you post them that there's a drop down that you can select to post to all panelists and to attendees. And that's it. If there are any questions along the way, just type them in and I will do my best to respond to them afterwards. And CXL are going to send out the slides and the recording after the session is done as well. So yes, let's begin. So when we look at optimizing experiences, a lot of the time we tend to look at the little things that we can change. We know something about how it's working already or not working, and in the best of cases we tend to have some hypothesis of how we're going to improve on those things. But quite often the way we work through these things tends to be more akin to being mechanics rather than architects. We tend to come in and fix things rather than really design and try to solve things from the word go. Now, I'm a UX designer by trade, and if we look at the project funnel, if we do it as a funnel, I aim to come in at the early stages of a project in the explore phase and be in to help shape everything from the beginning. Sometimes when I come in, because I'm a freelance, I come in once the strategy has already been defined, when the creative idea has already been defined as well. And that's fine, but sometimes I can take more of a fix, just sprinkle a bit of UX on it at the end rather than help shape the idea and the strategy and the creative execution from the start. And when we look at optimization, a lot of the time optimization also tends to come in even later in the funnel when things have already been designed and things have already been built. And this is where the decisions have already been made, and it's just fixing things rather than going back into solving things, something like Jeffrey Eisenberg was talking about a couple of years back at a conference. So there's a couple of issues with this problems and less ideal situations with it. And the first one is that a lot of the time we don't actually know if what we are working on optimizing is the right solution for our audience in the first place. We might be optimizing something that shouldn't be made that way, or perhaps not made at all. So we might be going down and optimizing something that's never going to work in the end. And secondly, this of situations, that funnel where optimization comes in at the very end rather than being involved from the start as well, tends to indicate something about how the organization is working. And if you think about it, it's not too dissimilar from this. You have different teams, different departments working in isolation and in silos, and everyone is seeing their own little world, but no one is really seeing what the other one is seeing as such. Now, when we look at optimization, it's really about asking questions. It's about understanding what, why, and how, and understanding how everything can be improved and how you can do it in the best possible way. But that's also something we do right at the beginning of a project, or at least we should do at the beginning of a project. To really understand things, of course, it's sometimes useful to make sure that we optimize button colors and obviously make sure we optimize call to actions and language and everything as well. But a lot of the time, what we should aim to do to make sure that we design experiences rather than try to just fix them is make sure that we design the right thing from the start and ask the right questions at the start to make sure that we deliver something that's going to work for our particular audience. So every single user that will go through and use our products and services, they will go on a journey with our products and services. And each of those journeys have a story behind them. There's a reason why the user came to us in the first place. There's a backstory to what they're hoping to accomplish and what goal they have in mind and what needs they actually have. And those are the things that we really need to understand. And to make sure that we can deliver experiences that really convert in the best possible way, we need to make sure that we don't only just have a good experience, but that we have a great understanding of the user and the user's context and what they set out to do, what they're looking to get along the way. And this is where we can draw from traditional storytelling principles. So today I'm going to be talking about how we can use storytelling to help both understand the problem space, look at how we can deliver experiences, and then analyze the outcome as well. Now, Aristotle was the first one to point out that the way in which we tell a story has a raw human impact on the human mind. So he had this kind of belief that there was a typical kind of structure to the way the stories was kind of set up, and there's a typical kind of hierarchy in what kind of should be involved. And he defined 7 principles of kind of good storytelling. The first one was the plot, the second one was the character, the third one was the idea or the kind of theme behind the kind of story, and then you have the speech, which is the conversations between the kind of actors or the kind of narrator, the chorus, which is the sound, and then the decor, which is the design of the space in which the story takes place. And then lastly, you have a spectacle, which is a kind of a memorable thing that the audience will remember at the end of it. Now, we're going to be looking at how we can use plot, character, and kind of decor. And the plot is one of the most important things, and I'll put that to start, obviously, for experiences that we're working on. The audience is the kind of the key thing that we want to start on. But the plot is very much about what you're going to be telling your audience and when. In plays, literature, and even in music, you talk about dramaturgy, and dramaturgy gives the performance a structure and explores the context in which the story kind of takes place. This is very much about shaping a story into a form that can be kind of acted out. Now, Aristotle talked about that each story should have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and this gave rise to what's called a kind of 3-act structure. The first act is used for exposition. This is where the main characters establish their relationship, and at the end of the first act, there's an incident that happens, something that changes the world of the kind of protagonist to make sure that their life is never going to be the same again. This is where the dramatic question is kind of raised. So will the boy, for example, get the girl? In the second act, the protagonist attempts to solve the problem that was initiated by the kind of turning point of the first act. They usually land themselves in a worse situation, and they learn a lot about themselves, and this is where the main kind of character development tends to kind of take place. And then in the third act, the kind of tension of the story is brought to its most intense point, and the dramatic question is answered. Did the boy actually get the girl? Now, when we look at typical kind of stories, they tend to have typical kind of types of shapes and kind of plot points, depending on what type of story it is. And this is something that a guy called Kurt Vonnegut spent a lot of his kind of working life actually kind of trying to define. He defined the shape of all stories, from Man in a Hole to the kind of Cinderella story. And there's a lot that we can actually learn and draw from this when we look at kind of the experiences of the product and services that we design as well. So we can look at typical kind of experiences, and they tend to have typical kind of plot points and stages of that experience as well. So if we, for example, take a purchase journey, you tend to have an awareness stage and a consideration stage, a purchase stage, and then kind of post-purchase stages. And you can break them down in different points or different levels of details. And there's different kind of plot points in each one as well, from kind of becoming aware to starting to consider, to looking further into the thing that you want to buy, to making a decision and then taking action or not taking action and so forth. So this is something we can learn a lot from, and actually make sure that we can work through experiences in a good way and see what we actually should be looking at. And it's important of making sure that we understand what matters at every single point and every single stage of an experience. Now, to go back to Aristotle's point of the importance of the way we tell stories, there's a great example over on Khan Academy of how Finding Nemo, when it was first created, had a lot of kind of flashbacks throughout the movies. When they did a test screening to the audience didn't actually like Nemo's dad at all. And when they asked why, it was because they didn't understand why he was kind of behaving the way they did. So for the creators of Finding Nemo, it was really important that the audience would kind of relate to Nemo's dad. So they changed the structure of the film, the way in which they told their story, so that the flashbacks were kind of included right at the beginning, but not so much about the movie. And this meant that right up front, the audience would understand that the reason why Nemo's dad was behaving the way he did was because Nemo's mum was killed by a barracuda. And immediately they had a completely different response to Nemo's dad, and that kind of completely changed the whole emotion of the story as well. So this is one good example of the importance of kind of structure and that kind of plot point, why it really matters when we tell something. For us, when we look at experiences and kind of making sure we create something that's going to convert best as possible, is making sure that we understand the backstory of users as well. So before we go into the experiences as well and what we do the work, we need to understand the backstory that the users are coming with. There's a big difference between someone who's trying to buy a product because it's something that kind of wows them and they want the latest thing, versus someone who's might have been robbed or a product might be broken and they need to buy a new one. So understanding that kind of backstory. And then we can kind of go back to the kind of shape of stories and draw from that and learn how we can actually map out and visualize what the experience should actually feel like. And this is something I learned when I was working back with the Sony Ericsson team many years ago now, but they looked at kind of hygiene factors, feel-good factors, and delight. So from the hygiene factors that just needs to be there, feel-good is one level up, and the delight, that kind of the points that really stand out. And actually setting experience goals. For each point in the journey, you have a goal of what the experience should feel like. You can use this and customize this to whatever you want it to be, by making sure that you understand and kind of see how the user will actually go through the experience, and try to visualize how that kind of emotional response should be throughout the kind of journey as well. And this is where we can look into points where we know there might be a drop-off. For example, maybe there's a drop-off right before kind of purchase. We need to make sure that the purchase feels kind of easy and simple, so we can make sure that that on an emotional level lands a little bit higher than kind of hygiene. Hygiene is just kind of has to be there. So the plot point can really help us both understand how things are at the moment. There's a lot that we can do in terms of customer journey maps, and analyze kind of the happy journey and the unhappy journey, where users are happy and where they're unhappy. We can use it to understand kind of how things should be and actually deliver to that as well. And then when it comes to the analysis of things, looking at each different kind of stage of the experience as well, and analyze why certain things are happening and why they're not, and setting hypotheses and setting metrics according to that, which we can then follow up later on with. Now, the second point is the characters. Without any characters, there wouldn't really be a story, and the protagonist is your main one in there. But shortly after your protagonist, you have villains, you've got friends, and you've got rivals and mentors, all which can be divided into main characters, supporting characters, subplot characters, and kind of one-string characters. And in screenwriting, you tend to talk about kind of character hierarchy, where you, depending on the type of kind of story it is, you might have in a slasher movie, the ones that survive the longest are going to be the most important ones. In a disaster movie, friends, rivals, and mentors tends to be on par with kind of protagonist. So when we do the work that we do, we tend to think about audiences and users and do personas for them to really help understand who they are. And that's great. But when we now look at defining experiences that are going to work on different platforms and different touch points, and work with so many different things out there, there's kind of different actors that we need to consider as well. And one of them are actually the devices that we're using, understanding what role they're going to play in the experience, from the type of things that they might be useful for doing, from browsing to actually buying and paying and getting notified, to how we're going to be using them. So the time of day, in terms of how we're going to go from one device to another, to what matters most, what's the kind of primary kind of device we're using, what's the secondary device that we're using. Increasingly, it's also about Internet of Things and about the smart home, and how all of these different players are going to have a role and are going to shape our lives and going to shape our kind of experiences as well. And then we're quite far from the experiences that we've seen in kind of Her, where we talk to kind of operating systems and they really, really understand us. We are now at a point where voice is becoming a kind of close to primary way of interacting, and where a lot of, I believe over in the US, over 50% are making kind of purchases using kind of voice as well. So these voice character behind them, and for us, it's actually about understanding them as well. Back when I studied computer science and business at Copenhagen Business School, we did a lot of these kind of diagrams. We did a lot of system thinking, systems analysis and design, and that's kind of what we need to get back to. The system, the brand, the tone of voice is now kind of actors and players in the experiences that we define. So we might not do kind of the typical kind of user personas, the marketing persona actually needed, so we can determine that tone of voice, we can determine what they should be doing and kind of when. So characters, go back and think about characters of a story, understand about who plays a role when, and map it back to the kind of stages of the experience. Make sure that you deliver to the specific needs. Increasingly now with artificial intelligence and machine learning, we can deliver to specific users and not just kind of a target audience as a whole. And then analyze for each stage and analyze for each kind of audience group as well, what works and what doesn't work, and understand kind of why. Thirdly, we have the decor. So the decor was the design of the place in which the story kind of takes place. So in all good stories, things happen for a reason. There's a kind of a red thread or narrative that runs through it, or something that kind of, you know, that the reason why you see a certain thing is because that's going to play a part later on in the experience. Now, when it comes to products and services that we're working on, there should, of course, be a narrative sequence and a red thread that runs through it all. But we shouldn't be too worried about signposting absolutely everything for users. We need to make sure that they can find their own way around content, and that no matter where they kind of land, they can actually find their way to where they need to go. Because the reality of things is that we no longer actually control the journey of our users. And with that, we don't always actually control their messaging. there used to be a time where we could quite accurately predict that user would go from kind of A to B. Their journeys were quite linear. They would start from the home page and then gradually work their way down from category pages to product pages and kind of the checkout. Today, it looks quite differently. Google and social are quite often the kind of home pages of what we experience, or what we're kind of designing, and the user will land right smack in the middle without any other context on the tweet or the kind of the search result that came along with the link that they actually clicked on. And e-commerce, again, is a great example of this, where a typical kind of search path and how we go about buying something isn't restricted to just one site, but it jumps from one to another and includes so many different interactions and searches on various different kind of platforms. So as much as we want to make things simple and so much as we kind of think that it's quite straightforward, the reality is pretty much always like this scene from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, where there's so many interdependencies that we need to really understand. And it might, to some extent, feel like it's kind of pointless because there could be so many possibilities of doing things. But actually, the way that things are so complex now calls for us to actually map out and understand it even more than we've done before. And this is, again, we're drawing back on kind of storytelling principles can kind of help us and make it a fun exercise that we can work through. So if you think about a story or a kind of a film, you've got your different sequences and you've got your different scenes. And that's kind of very much what we really need to be thinking about. We need to think about all of the stages of an experience, all of the screens that we show, all of the different touch points as kind of sets, and what the different elements of the set should be included in as well. So there might be, if we're working on a campaign, for example, we need to identify what all the drivers are, what all the different aspects are that are going to influence that kind of experience and influence the decisions that the user will actually take. So going back to kind of looking at experience maps, as an example, we should make sure that we still have those kind of stages at the top, and then that we kind of define the set of each kind of scene and each kind of stage as well, so we know what the different parts is and how they kind of relate to each other. So make sure that you identify the questions you need to kind of answer for your kind of ecosystem if it's a campaign. Make sure you understand what makes a difference when, and kind of ask and answer those questions. And this is very much we can kind of help utilize the products and the kind of deliverables that we work with already, where we can use the likes of experience maps to develop them even further, to make them become a kind of storytelling framework where we can adjust the bottom part, which is thinking, feeling, and experience, to something else. We can capture our hypothesis, we can capture conversion rates at the moment, we can capture and highlight what works and what doesn't work, and really use this as a kind of a working tool that we print out and have big up on the kind of wall. So for decor, make sure to think about all of the different aspects that kind of fits together. Make sure you can use it as a way to understand how they fit together, and then deliver a narrative experience that involves all of those different touch points. It might not be that user goes through all of them, but some way or another they kind of collect and kind of relate. And then analyze each element in there as well and see how they all kind of fit together. So that's the kind of the plot, the characters, and the kind of decor in there as well. Now, of course, when we talk about optimization, we need to kind of talk about data as well. So a lot of what we have access to now is large amounts of kind of data, and it's an importance that we make sure that we understand that data can actually tell us absolutely everything and nothing, that we dig in and kind of combine qualitative and quantitative data in there. So I can't remember who said this, but it was back on Conversion Hotel where someone mentioned that the reason why 50 Shades of Grey became so popular was because people can read it on a Kindle rather than kind of flaunt the cover of the book, as they did in this mock-up example on the kind of right. So we need to understand why users are taking the actions that they're doing, and why something is working the way it is or why it isn't working. And that it's not might just be the kind of simple and obvious reason, but making sure that we go in and we talk to users afterwards. We don't just run focus groups, or we talk to individual users and understand really where they're coming from and what makes them take action and not take action in there. And of course, there's a lot that we can learn from best practices and data we have already. So if, for example, we know that 65% or 64% of women, they will kind of respond positively to seeing what they can style with and kind of see products in context. That's something that we can build into the narrative of the experiences that we're working with as well. And always try to think that kind of one step ahead in terms of where does the user actually want to go. And by understanding each stage of the experience and understanding the goals and the motivations of the user at each stage, understanding what the barriers are, this is where we can help just shape what the narrative should be, not just for the experience as a whole, but for individual screens as well. So all of this really helps us make sure that we kind of have a more clear and accurate setup from the start, that we have a profound understanding of users and actors and the different kind of journeys they're going to be going on and the different steps they're going to be taking, how the ecosystem actually fits together and how everything works together. And there can be a red thread that runs through all of it, from users and actors to the kind of experiences and the kind of ecosystem. But also actually that we can apply it to the processes and the organization within we work as well, and make sure that there's a red thread that runs through the process. And obviously this is a very simplified explore, define and measure funnel, but making sure that there's something that connects all of those as well, which requires that we kind of break down silos and work in collaboration. And this is very much where going back and kind of looking at experience maps and similar things can help break down those kind of silos. So no matter kind of what lens you want to put on and use and how you want to use storytelling, whether you want to use it to understand or whether you want to actually deliver experiences to kind of analyze the outcome at the end of it, the thing to remember when it comes to storytelling is that however we kind of create and however we tell stories, and a good one, there's an element of magic involved where they capture our imagination, has the ability to show us something new. And time again, we've been told that, you know, dry facts, that doesn't move anyone into action, but story actually works. And that's kind of where we lower our intellectual guards and can move people into action. And that emotional connection is really the key to everything. That's the aim of every single story. And that's kind of what we're striving for as well, to understand at each stage of an experience what that emotional connection can be and how we can move users into action and actually accomplish things that they want to do, but also help accomplish the things that we want them to accomplish for the business. So next time you work on a project, have a look and see what it is that what you're looking at, and see how you can actually deliver a story around it. Maybe you can create a narrative around it, whether that's through kind of copy, whether it's through the kind of the messaging that goes with it, or kind of images or the setup of the page. But you can make the user see something more than just the kind of dry facts in there. So for your next project, work through what is it that you want your audience to see? What's the story that you actually want to tell them? And in the end, where do you actually want to take them? A lot of the time, the kind of key to moving someone into action doesn't just lie in the story itself, but it lies in creating and understanding this whole world that comes along with it. And that all starts with once upon a design, or perhaps once upon a design, or perhaps once upon a design. So that was very much it. You can ask questions now through the kind of the chat function in there, and I will do my best to kind of answer this as well. And if you want to learn more about UX, we have a UX for Marketers course starting on Tuesday, and there's a discount code that I'm going to copy and paste in here now, so you can see that one. And it's called CXL-UX-Marketeers. So you can go in and get $100 off the course at the end of it. Any questions you want to know more about? Any questions you want to learn how to kind of more practically go about it? So there's elaborating about the transition of persons to systems. So if I go back to that slide. So a lot of the time when we look at defining audiences, we work a lot with kind of personas. So we work a lot at identifying, you know, their needs and their motivations and who they actually are. And a lot of the time now when we're thinking about, we're working with bots, for example, bots that are doing the job of a human being before. They are an active actor in that kind of experience, and we need to define what role they're going to be playing. And just as a normal actor would do when they're going to be playing a part in a play or in a movie, do that kind of development of how they behave and how they react in terms of certain situations. So there might be something, particular situation where they need to hand it over to a human being, to a customer service representative. There might be something that we need to define in terms of their tone of voice. There's little things now that we're seeing in kind of voice interfaces as well, where a lot of the time it's kind of female voices rather than male voices, because they convert a bit better. The audience can respond to them a little bit better as well. So making sure that we actually go through and define what it is that we need to identify for each one to make sure that we can deliver the best possible experience as well. And this is where also we can tie back to kind of setting hypotheses around and measurements and setting goals for how much, you know, a bot should be converting, and see where we can highlight where things isn't working as well. So we can tie it back again to kind of experience maps or whatever framework we're kind of working with. There's a question about how we can go back and get the recording again. So the team was going to send out all of the recording straight after, or quite soon after this. You'll get all the recording in that as well. So yes, they'll send out an email in there. End of the day. Perfect. And if you have any more questions on this, feel free to reach out and find me on Twitter as well. And I'll do my best to maybe just do a kind of follow up or something and kind of answer your questions as well. If there's something that when you go through this later on, because I know there's a lot of detail in that way, you can, I'll try to answer them later on as well. So my Twitter handle is Anna Dahlstrom, just in one. So you'll find that from, you can quite easily find me on Twitter if you search that in. Any other questions you want to know about? Anything more about the kind of practical? I know this is still quite high level in terms of what we can draw inspiration from storytelling. Or any other particular UX question that I can help with? So how to create the story. Yes. I mean, can you elaborate a bit more about why it's hard to tell a story and relate with the kind of the main kind of character? Because I think when we think about kind of storytelling and how we can apply it to our work, we need to remember that too. Whatever it is that we're working on, there's always, at the end of it, we're always trying to sell something to someone. We're always trying to get someone to do something at the end of it. And that action is often one that's not necessarily just kind of bottom down in kind of numbers, but something that has some kind of emotional connection to it as well. So even if you think about, if you have a report, there needs to be a kind of a narrative structure to that as well. So without knowing your hotel software, a lot of the time it actually starts with understanding, going back to who the character, main character actually is. And if the main character in this instance is the person you're trying to sell it to, try to actually do a bit of this kind of almost like persona work for that kind of that kind of character as well. So I actually teach and coach teams on how they can use persona development as a way of kind of working with stakeholders as well. So understanding really what it is that your stakeholders are going to be relating to. And actually I can't remember off the top of my head now, but in, I believe the last lesson of the upcoming UX and marketers course, we'll be looking at kind of dealing with stakeholders and how you can buy in for UX. And that's kind of similar. It touches on that as well. We need to really understand what the stakeholders care about and what matters to them. And we need to understand what makes them take action, what makes them not take action in there. So it's about understanding what will, understanding, almost looking at the kind of plot points. So going back and drawing inspiration from, I'm trying to find the right slide here. Give me a second. Drawing inspiration from this slide where we look at how the kind of experience maps out. Maybe there's a point, if you analyze how the current experience is of actually selling in hotel software, where does it break down? What point do you actually get to? Look at the different stages that you're going through in your selling purchase or in selling purchase. And then maybe you're talking more about kind of designing and of it. But either way, whatever it is that you're working with, look at each stage and what works and what doesn't work. And experience maps can be a great one for actually capturing all of that information as well. So looking at how you customize the boxes at the bottom. So in here you can highlight, for example, whether thinking it might be something of what user needs and business needs might be, and you can highlight in red or in green what works and what doesn't work. You can highlight in the main kind of embodiment where you've got the graphs and kind of illustrations, what kind of graphics in there, what's working, what isn't working, so you get a visual picture of the kind of story. So there's a lot of power in actually visualizing things and having the story mapped out, no matter how simple you make it, even if you just make it as a kind of key kind of plot points in there, but just some framework that gives you something you can reference and you can use that as a way to look at, okay, if we look at this one at the moment, what do we have right now? What works, what doesn't work? What can we do to make this better? And what kind of tests can we run to see how we can optimize this? How can we, what hypotheses do we have for each of the different stages? Which ones have we tested before? Which ones do we need to run new tests on? And how can we kind of tie back and kind of capture the data into that as well? So use all of these different things as much as possible. And if you search for customer experience maps, this is one of the most famous ones. It's from Adaptive Path. There's a book as well called The Mapping Experiences by Jim Kalbach. There's loads out there. So I know that this isn't particularly kind of storytelling, but the key really is that storytelling lies on absolutely everything. So use what you're already working with and just think about kind of using the plot and the characters and the decor as a way of kind of a framework of it. So customize it in your own way. And yes, if you want to learn more, you can always contact me. So I will type my email address here, and then you can email me if you oops, obviously not coin. On Twitter. And that's me on Twitter. I think that's right. Yes. So yes, experience maps are absolutely brilliant. So with whatever it is, just optimize things for whatever works for you. But kind of think that the main thing is really that there lies a story behind absolutely everything that we do, and whether we are creating a report at the end of it, whether we are trying to understand something, often if we just take a step back and try to actually plot out and map out what the different things are, and even on if you're looking again at this customer experience map, you can actually add in the characters as well. So you can do one for a particular character, you can do one, include like little icons for the characters in there as well. You can plot in devices of it as well and just look at what matters at every single point. So there's a lot of ways that you can kind of optimize this in a way that works for you and becomes a framework and a tool that you can print up big out the wall and have them kind of come back and refer to. I think that's the half hour that we're going to be using. I'm happy to stay on a bit longer if there's any more kind of lingering questions that you guys have. Otherwise, as I said before, feel free to drop me an email on that email address, or just drop me a tweet or a DM. My DMs on Twitter are open, so you don't necessarily have to broadcast it to the public if you don't want to. But thank you so much for listening in. And if there's nothing else, I'm gonna say goodbye for now and go down to my little 7-month daughter, which I'm very happy that she didn't do a BBC and kind of crash the presentation and came in screaming. That would have worked, but it would have been a different kind of webinar. So yeah, thank you very much everyone, and have a great weekend.